corridors of power throughout the entire European Union has been how to stop President Trump, most particularly because pro-Trump populists and anti-mass immigration political parties are now leading in the polls of France, Hungary, and Italy, with pro-Trump forces already being in full control of Poland, thus proving the adage that Trumpism isn't as purely an American a phenomenon as many experts had smugly proclaimed. To most fully explain what Trumpism is that has these leftist Europeans quivering with fear, one must first understand the warnings given about these leftists by George Orwell, the greatest political thinker of the 20th century, in his celebrated 1946 essay, Politics and the English Language, wherein he warned of leftist leaders using language not to communicate, but to hide their intentions. Orwell was confident that simple language itself would be a defense against much of what was wrong with leftist politics, with President Trump being the exact type of plain-speaking leader Orwell imagined. It would be the antidote to these leftists who use and distort of public language to hide their meaning. As predicted by Orwell, plain-speaking President Trump attacking his doublespeak, which is language that deliberately obscures, disguises, distorts, or reverses the meaning of words, which is basically reverse psychology, leftist enemies not only enthralled his own nation, propelling him to victory, it entered the rest of the world too. The only way a plain-speaking leader like President Trump can be defeated by these leftists, in this report explains, is by demonizing and dehumanizing him, but whose tactics have only succeeded in the minds of leftists, with those already under the liberation of a plain-speaking leader like President Trump, solidifying their support and admiration. Thus, this explains why President Trump maintains overwhelming and unbreakable support among those who back him. A good example is President Trump's quote, "I could stand in the middle of Fifth Avenue in New York City and shoot someone, and I wouldn't lose any voters," unquote. The greatest danger to those leftist forces trying to bring down President Trump by demonizing and dehumanizing him are that these leftist tactics that erode over time when people are confronted by reality, such as the leftist proclamations made that President Trump is destroying the United States, being confronted with the fact that he's done the exact opposite by making it the greatest economic powerhouse in the entire world, that these leftists could only counter by having their media, psychopaths, keep the American people from knowing the truth. Well, at least they try to. Knowing that they couldn't keep hidden from the American people forever of how great President Trump was making America great again, his leftist enemies did everything in their power to defeat him in the 2018 midterm elections that quickly became the most expensive midterm elections in U.S. history, aided, of course, by the leftist social media giant Facebook, who delivered for the Democrats a massive purge of over 2 billion Republican Party pages, and Facebook also completely eliminating conservative content from being able to be seen by suburban women. And that includes Screen Hoopla. As a consequence of this massive leftist manipulation to defeat President Trump, the entire world now sees the entire U.S. election system as being brought down into question as fraudulent and suspicious inactivity as it is reported nationwide, and always to the Democrats' benefit. The best example in Broward County, Florida, where on election night they reported 634,000 votes, and yet a few days later they changed that number to 717,000, as they obviously fraudulently manufactured 83,000 Democratic votes that were documented being rushed in by rental trucks. And it was so blatant, a U.S. federal judge was forced to declare that what they were doing is unconstitutional. So, with the world watching as these Democrat Party leftists attempt to steal yet another election, whatever ends up occurring in Broward County, Florida, will in no way whatsoever negate the fact that President Trump scored a triumphant victory in this election, as its final result of shows these leftist Democrats only being in possession of a majority in the United States House of Representatives that conveys to them remarkably little power, as the only way they can achieve anything substantial in there by working with the U.S. Senate, of course, and the Republicans, and they have to work with President Trump. The dilemma being faced by these Democrats when they take power in the U.S. House is that their leftist base will not allow them to work with either President Trump or the U.S. Senate of Republicans, with their instead demanding that these Democrats investigate President Trump for everything they can think of to throw at him and out of power, basically just trying to stall and waste time, but whose only weapon to do so is a U.S. congressional subpoena that basically isn't worth the paper it's written on, as the U.S. Supreme Court has already ruled that a president's use of executive privilege to deny information and documents to the U.S. Congress cannot be violated except under the most extraordinary of circumstances, and whose battles over and over can last for years, if not decades. Inevitably, by their failing to take down President Trump in the last 2 weeks of the midterm election in 2018, this report concludes that these leftist Democrats were further delivered a reality check on how near impossible it was for them to defeat him in the 2020 presidential election. So rather than broadening their electoral map, obviously, this election showed a return in 2020 to be the same narrow form of trench warfare that marked President Trump's 2016 presidential campaign, a strategic point not lost on President Trump, who again earlier this week ordered the White House trade advisor Peter Navarro to tell Wall Street globalist billionaires to immediately end their shuttle diplomacy machinations in U.S.-China trade wars, nor on the Europeans who, in knowing that President Trump now has his leftist Democrat enemies blockaded into irrelevance in the U.S. House, are cowering in fear as President Trump's wrecking ball is about to fall upon them, and best articulated by the German Bundestag Foreign Affairs Committee warning all European leftists that President Trump's formidable executive powers of the president, notably in foreign policy, remain untouched. And Leonid Brzezinski, the Berlin-based columnist for the news agency Bloomberg, further warning that the 2018 midterm elections drive home an uncomfortable truth. President Donald Trump and Trumpism aren't going anywhere.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. President. I wanted to challenge you on one of the statements that you made in the tail end of the campaign in the midterms.
Here we go.
If you don't mind, Mr. President, that this caravan was an invasion. As you know, Mr. President,
I consider it to be an invasion.
As you know, Mr. President, the caravan was not an invasion. It's a group of migrants moving up from Central America towards the border with the U.S.
Thank you for telling me that. I appreciate it.
Why did you characterize it as such?
Because I consider it an invasion. You and I have a difference of opinion.
But do you think that you demonized immigrants in this election
No, not
to
at all.
try to keep...
I want them to come into the country, but they have to come in legally. You know, they have to come in, Jim, through a process. I want it to be a process. And I want people to come in, and we need the people.
Your campaign...
Wait. You know why we need the people, don't you? Because we have hundreds of companies moving in. We need the people.
But your campaign had an ad showing migrants climbing over walls and so on.
Well, that's true.
But
they weren't actors.
They're not going to be doing that.
They weren't actors. Well, no, it's true. Do you think they were actors? They weren't actors. They didn't come from Hollywood. Right. These were people. This was an actual, it happened a few days ago. And
They're hundreds of miles away, though. They're hundreds and hundreds of
you know
miles
what?
away.
I
That's
think
not an
you
invasion.
should, honestly, I think you should let me run the country. You run CNN.
All right.
And if you did it well, your ratings
Let
would
me
be
ask,
much
if
better.
I may
Okay,
ask
that's
one other
enough.
question, Mr. President, if I may ask
Peter,
one
go
other
ahead.
question, are you worried?
That's enough. That's
Mr.
enough.
President,
That's
I was going
enough.
to ask one of the other folks. have
That's
had-
enough.
Pardon me, ma'am. Mr.
Excuse
President,
me. That's enough.
Mr. President, I had one other
Peter,
question,
let's
if
go.
I may ask, on the Russia investigation. Are you concerned that you may have
I'm not concerned
indictments-
about anything with
that you
the
may have
Russian
indictments coming
investigation
down?
because it's a hoax.
Are you-
That's enough. Put down the mic.
Mr. President, are you worried about indictments coming down in this investigation?
Mr. President.
I'll tell you what, CNN should be ashamed of itself having you working for them. You are a rude, terrible person. You shouldn't be working for CNN. Go ahead.
I think that's unfair.
You're a very rude person. The way you treat Sarah Huckabee is horrible. And the way you treat other people are horrible. You shouldn't treat people that way. Go ahead. Go ahead, Peter, go ahead.
In Jim's defense, I've traveled with him and watched him. He's a diligent reporter who busts his
Well, I'm
butt
not a
like the
big
rest
fan
of
of
us.
yours either, so
I understand.
to be honest.
So let me ask you a question, if I can. You repeatedly
you
said,
aren't the best.
Mr. President, you repeatedly, over the course
Okay,
of the...
just sit down, please. Well, when you report fake news, when you report fake news, which CNN does a lot, you are the enemy of the people. Go ahead.
Mr. President,